Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 3. A Daring Event. Zircon opened his eyes. His head was pounding. He acknowledged muffled voices through the piercing tones ringing in his ears, but his vision was far too blurry to discern the varying shades of darkness before him. Where was he? He slid his eyes downwards, blinking as his eyesight began to regain some clarity, and peered at the cobbled streets below him. He was moving. His legs were limp, being dragged across the floor, and he could just about make out two more pairs of legs walking along beside him from the silvery shine of their greaves. When his hearing finally began to clear, he could hear the repetitive clinking of their heavy steps as well. His arms were being gripped tightly, and his whole body ached deeply. The memories of what had befallen him quickly began to flood back, and Zircon finally managed to look up. Two men, one on either side, and both dressed in the red and black uniform of the City Watch, were marching him down the dark street. His trouser legs were dampened against the wet cobbles as the towering figure of the castle, and within the dungeon, came closer and closer. Damn it, he thought. I've really done it this time. Gentlemen, please, he pleaded, raising his head stiffly and squinting as the flickering light of the street lamps assaulted his aching eyes. I think there's been some sort of mistake. I'm sure there has, one guard said dryly, not even looking at him. You don't understand, Zircon shouted in reply. I've been viciously attacked. Oh, that's terrible, sir, continued the guard, still not bothering to look down. Who could have done such a thing? It was a man and his cronies, exclaimed Zircon, pressing his feet to the ground and pushing against it in a feeble attempt at walking. More an ape than a man, with a face that not even a mother could love. They viciously attacked me while I was having a quiet drink at the tavern. Suddenly, the guards began chuckling to each other. Surprised, Zircon finally braved the stinging lights and raised his head to look indignantly at both of his captors. I hardly think that the guards should be laughing at such a serious matter. His voice trailed off as the second guard looked down to meet his gaze. A familiar face. It was Greg. Oh, said Zircon, looking down once again. I see. Greg and the other guard burst out laughing as Zircon began to panic internally. He breathed quiet but laboured breaths through his nose, faster and faster as he came closer and closer to a life in the dungeon. He knew he had to do something. As the two guards sneered further and marched Zircon onward, he suddenly and violently retched, arms pulling hard against their grip as he launched forward and his body began to convulse. They pulled him back harshly, but he no longer responded properly to their force. Ah, shit, Greg muttered, releasing his grip and allowing Zircon to fall into a shaking heap on the cobbles. I think he's having a seizure. Greg, said the other guard, putting his hand to his face. Could you not have just arrested him on the spot instead of beating him to a pulp? Greg looked down, snarling. Hey, nobody steals from me. Anyway, I barely touched him. The other guard rolled his eyes. Oh yeah, it's never your fault, is it, Greg? Zircon opened one of his eyes as the guards bickered. He continued to convulse wildly, but as he did, he shuffled slowly along the ground, bit by bit, like a caterpillar. Why do you care anyway? Shouted Greg. He's just a common charlatan. It doesn't matter, replied the other guard, pointing downward stubbornly. He's in the custody of the City Watch. We've got paperwork to fill in if this guy dies. Greg scoffed. He won't die, he's fine, look. The guard's eyes grew wide as they again looked down and surveyed the street around them. Zircon was gone. Their heads spun around quickly, just in time to see the end of a dark cloak disappearing into an alleyway up ahead. After him! Greg shouted, and they both scrambled to give chase. Zircon limped quickly through the dark alleyway. His joints clicked and cracked and hurt with every step, but he knew he had to keep going. He had to escape the guards. He had to get out of the city. Suddenly, his foot caught a cobble, and he toppled over onto the hard, wet ground. He groaned, then proceeded to claw his way back onto his feet with exclamations of agony. As he did, he heard a bell ring out loudly in the distance. It was the bell of the city guard. There would be a city-wide search now. He knew it. "Split up!" a guard's voice echoed throughout the streets. "Find him!" Zircon dashed forward again and down another side alley, throwing his back to the wall as he closed his eyes and tried to bear the pain shooting through his body. When he took a deep breath and opened his eyes again, he peered up at the path ahead, and his heart suddenly sank. A tall wooden fence stood at the end of the alley, blocking further escape entirely. He turned back to where he had come from, hoping against all odds that he still had time. The loud clanking of armoured footsteps approaching from around the corner told him, clearly, that he did not. He turned again. He looked at the fence. He shook his limbs and he braced himself. Dashing forward with his cloak flapping behind him, Zircon leapt up toward the fence, grabbing the top and clinging on for dear life as he swung wildly from its ledge. He desperately tried to pull himself up, but for his weak arms and aching core, he simply couldn't find the strength. He dropped back down, stifling an agonised scream as his knees buckled under him. Standing up from the cold floor as best as he could bear, Zircon looked around him one more time. On the wall of the large stone building comprising the right side of the alley, there was a door. That was his only option now. With time running out, he took a sharp breath and limped over to it. He tried to twist the handle, but, of course, it was locked. Grimacing, he took a step back and threw his shoulder onto the door. It rocked on its hinges, and Zircon gritted his teeth in pain. He tried again, harder, swearing under his breath as his shoulder pounded the wood. He heard the heavy footsteps approaching fast and hit the door again in frustrated panic. He was losing hope. He took a deep breath, counting down the seconds he had like a doomsday clock, and went for it again. This time, the door creaked and rattled on its hinges. The pain no longer bothered Zircon. He took a deep breath in through his nose and ran at the door one last time.